Hello everyone, welcome to our second webinar, which is called Young Cancer Nurses, You Can Be a Leader Too. I'm Michaela Popelkova and I will moderate this webinar with my amazing colleague Amanda Drury. Thank you, you are here with us. We would like to send warm welcome to Sweden and to the United Kingdom to our speakers, Dr. Lina Sharp and Professor Teresa Weissman. Dr. Lina Sharp is the head of Cancer Care Improvement Regional Cancer Center in Stockholm, Sweden. He was previously the Chief Nursing Officer and Patient Safety Coordinator at the Department of Oncology, Karolinska University Hospital, and has a long experience in cancer nursing, clinical work, leadership, teaching, and research. Lina's main research focus is healthcare communication and patient safety. Lina has a PhD from the Karolinska Institute in Sweden. Lina is the current Advocacy Working Group Chair and past President of the European Oncology Nursing Society. And please, Amanda, let's introduce Professor Teresa Weissman.
And hello, and I'd also like to introduce Teresa Weissman, who's a clinical nurse academic with a joint appointment between the Royal Marsden NHS Foundation Trust and the University of Southampton. She holds a chair in applied health research in cancer care, and she's passionate about research, but more so than it makes the difference to patients and families. She has always maintained a clinical component in her role and has a joint clinical academic post since 2008. She has an international reputation as a clinical academic. She is an executive board member of the EONS and of other roles, including board member of the European Cancer Organization, board member of ABC Global Alliance, and board member of Breast Cancer International. Her research focuses on patient experiences of cancer and treatment and developing services and interventions to ameliorate that experience. Current work involves the experience of immunotherapy and living with advanced melanoma and using virtual reality as a way of coping with treatment. Her international work involves developing research capacity and survivorship pathways in Ghana and Tanzania. So I would just like to take this opportunity to welcome all of our participants this evening. I'd just like to point out that if you have any questions or for Teresa or for Lina, please do share them in the chat. We will have some time at the end to field questions and some discussion. And if you happen to be tweeting, please don't hesitate to use our hashtag EONS Nightingale Challenge 2020. So I will hand back to Michaela, who will be our Master of Ceremonies this evening.
So I'm giving the word to Dr. Lina Sharp for her presentation or for her tips for us how to be the good leader.
Okay, actually, I think we're gonna discuss that together, me and Teresa, so you're gonna hear us both talk at the same time. We've done that many times, Teresa, haven't we?
We certainly have, yeah.
I just thought about something during the introductions that we've been working together in the EONS board for many years, but we also have many things in common, but one of them is that we both was awarded by the ISNCC this year, both you and me, which is awards that we haven't been able to pick up because nothing is normal. But I received the Robert Tiffany Award and you received the Distinguished Merit Award. So I suppose we should tap our shoulders a bit.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Even though we haven't got it.
No, we haven't got it yet. So,
okay.
Is there anything you want to add in the introduction about your experience as a leader, Teresa?
I suppose I suppose it's one of those things, isn't it? As a cancer nurse, we certainly believe that all the cancer nurses are leaders. And I suppose in terms of leader roles, my roles have included being a sister, a clinical teacher, a lecturer, a senior lecturer and a professor. But but my most recent one was the strategic lead for applied health research in cancer care. But as you were saying earlier, Lena, it's also about the leadership across the board, not just in the sort of employment roles you have, but also in what you do for the society and cancer nurses per se. So I suppose that's why we thought that within this webinar, what we would do was talk about our top 10 tips for leadership and ways of managing systems and getting the most out of yourself and others, I suppose. So shall I start with the introduction, or are you going to? Yeah. Okay. So welcome everybody, as you've already been welcomed by our hosts. This Nightingale Challenge webinar is going to be about Lena and my 10 top tips to being an excellent cancer nurse leader. And we're going to conduct this webinar as a conversation, and we're going to use the framework of Valerie Diazibos, I think that's how you say it, 2019. And what we intend to do is to go through each tip and use examples from our career to illustrate that tip. And then we'll sort of alternate, we'll do a bit of a sort of Bill and Ben, if you like, to make sure that, you know, we're keeping you on your toes. So if we just share the first slide. Oh, have we got the slide? Yeah. So these are the 10 top tips of Diados. And these are the 10 top tips we're going to go through. So the first one is communication, then it's attitudes and confidence, teamwork, networking, critical thinking and creative problem solving, professionalism, empathy, conflict resolution, adaptability, and initiative and strong work ethic. And what we think we'll do is sort of leave those 10 top tips up so you can see what's coming next. But Lena's going to start with the first one, which is communication.
Yeah, thank you, Teresa. Yes, and I noticed that Valerie Zisado, whatever her name is, she also call it soft tips. And I don't know if they're so soft, but let's start with one that can be both soft and not so soft, and that's communication. And I think there's no coincidence that communication is the first tip, because it's so very important with communication in leadership, whatever you do, and it's also so difficult. So I think we quite often underestimate the importance of communication, and there's so many conflicts that are results of miscommunication. So as a leader, I think it's important to communicate with everyone, which sounds very easy, but it can actually be very difficult. Mm-hmm. And also to be polite and to listen. To listen to people is a very important part of communication. And I want to, communication, first of all, is very closely connected to both patient and occupational safety. So it's many different aspects of communication. And I think it's important to communicate your vision. Sometimes we think that we know, or that other people know what we want to do, but they might not know that. So one sort of strategy that I've used, or one mission that I've tried to use in my work, is to say that you should put patient and quality, safety and quality first, because very often we think that economy and staffing and other aspects is so important, but actually if you sort out safety and quality, you get all the rest as well. So I think for me, that's it comes later down the list, but I think it's been important to just say to people, I don't look at economy first, I look at safety and quality, for instance. I also want to say that to give feedback is also a very important part of communication, but it has to be constructive. You can't just tell people, "Oh, you're so brilliant" all the time, or or even worse, you can't say that you're not doing very well unless you explain what it is you see, because it's not believable unless it's constructive. So I think that's important. And another couple of tips within communication is, I'm sure you've heard it all before, but it's to try not to respond to sensitive emails when you're exhausted or stressed or angry. Even sleep on it and try to look at it tomorrow, and you might see it differently. So not to be so urgent when it comes to communication when you can wait. I think that's important. And written communication is very tricky. And as an example, when I did not succeed very well was actually in 2006 when I completed my PhD. In Sweden, you write a book with your PhD, and I thought I was being really clever and inclusive because I wrote up the name on each of the nurses in my team that I worked with to thank them. It's just that I was the head nurse of a radiotherapy unit at the time, and there was plenty of other nurses working there that was not in my team, and it only took 5 minutes until I took that dissertation off the printers. They came to me and said, "What's wrong? Why didn't you mention us? We've worked really hard to help you with your PhD." And I felt so bad about it. It would have been much better if I just thanked all
yeah, everybody that had helped.
Yeah. So yeah, I think, yeah, that's it, what I want to say about communication.
Yeah. So yeah, and it's funny, Lena, though, because I think very often whenever we talk, something around quality and safety always comes up. So I can see that's a really good tip from you, especially thinking about all of your sort of leadership roles within sort of management and leadership of sort of large groups of nurses within organizations as well. I think for me, I'm so with you as well, that communication is the key. And when I look back on when things have gone wrong or not as I planned, it's usually because of a communication difference. And like you, I think it's always good to talk less and listen more. And the thing that I like to do when I'm listening more is think about people's different perspectives. And it's so important to listen and understand what drives people. And one example of when I got it horribly wrong, is funny that we're both talking about when we got it wrong.
Yeah.
But yeah, one time when I got it horribly wrong was when I was trying to get funding for my research group. We're all clinicians, or we all work for an NHS trust, an NHS hospital. And I was trying to get funding for my group from our Biomedical Research Centre, which is the sort of national funding that's given out to all hospitals. And at the Marsden where I work, like most other organisations, the research funding goes to doctors and scientists involved in molecular sort of clinical work. And usually my funding, I would apply to the charity and outside agencies, but at this point I'd brought in sort of maybe £1 million in research funding, so I thought that I could get it from the hospital. Anyway, I wrote this application, and I wrote it and I rewrote it, and every time it was refused. And this was over the course of a year, but and every time they were saying, "Oh yeah, we think you're very good value for money, but you've not written the application in a way that we can fund it." And it was a really difficult time. And then in the end, we decided as a group that we would just go back to sort of square one and write and write our own research grants and carry on with that sort of strand for a while, because it was just getting so stressful. And it's funny because in a short time we got more funding in, another sort of €400,000, and that because it came into the BRC, it made them notice, whereas before it had come in through the nursing route. But because it had come in through their route, they made them notice. And the other thing was that I was involved in the national research funding as a clinical advocate for nurses. And so they started asking our BRC, our Biomedical Research Centre, they started saying things like, oh, and you've got Teresa and her group here, haven't you? And things like that. So then they came to me, but I suppose the sort of upshot of that story is that I didn't realise what it was that would tick their boxes. And it was about bringing funding in anyway. And then it was also about the national people noticing us. So it was much more about, they weren't interested in us per se, but they were interested in us in relation to other things that affected them. So again, that's made me think, when I think about communication, it's really important to get the perspective of the person that you're talking to.
Exactly. I think we tend to spend too little time on thinking of the other person's or the other part's perspective. So I think you're right.
Yeah, and it's easy, I think, for nurses, especially when we're not used to that language and priorities of either medical or business groups. It's easy for us to slip between the cracks until you sort of really focus on what speaks to them. So that's my sort of tip. The first one is about communication. So our second area of tip is attitude and confidence, and I'm going to go first in this one. So even though I don't always have confidence in myself, you know, it's the usual nursing imposter syndrome, I do have confidence in my knowledge, and I do have confidence in what I know, but more definitely I have confidence in what I don't know. So I've got a thing that if I don't know something, I always admit it up front, and certainly as soon as I can. And what I found is that this has stood me in really good stead with colleagues of all professions, because they know that I won't speak about something that I don't know about, and I'll go and find out about things that I don't know about. So I'm therefore seen as somebody that speaks with authority. And I think this is important, because I think it's easy for others to think that as nurses, we don't have particular knowledge. So if you ask somebody, well, what's the knowledge of a nurse? If you ask a medic, say, they'll say, well, they know how to look after people. But you could also say that, you know, your mother looks after people, or your brother looks after people. So I think it is really important that we think about what our particular knowledge is as a nurse, and that we, you know, almost to say that if we don't know what we know and what's specialist about our nursing knowledge, then we can't expect others to. So that's my first thing about confidence, but it's also about being the best prepared person in the room and always be prepared to speak. So if I'm going into a meeting, especially if it's with other professionals, but even not if it's with nurses, I always make sure that I'm prepared for what it is that I'm going in for, and I'm always prepared to speak up. So if it's something that I don't understand, I'll say, hold on a minute, I'm sorry, I don't understand what we're talking about here. And only now and then have people said, oh, we've just been talking about it, and I've not noticed. But most of the time, I think, it is really important for you to be well prepared, but also to be prepared to speak up. There's been times in particular teams where I find people try to use knowledge as power and speak in a group about, you know, particular medical or science or molecule knowledge within a meeting, so that it's hard for me to contribute. And in those instances, I've always brought things back to patients and pathways, or the difference that research or innovation will make, because that's certainly something that nursing knowledge knows a lot about. And also, if I think that there's a meeting that it's just focused on medical research and I'm not able to speak out, or, you know, the meeting doesn't really have anything to do with me, then I'll usually speak out and I'll say things like, oh, you know, I can see that I'm not really contributing to this meeting, so I'll excuse myself. And usually, if they are talking about molecules all the time, they're quite happy with that, really, because it means they don't have to keep trying to pretend they're talking about something else, like patients or something. But one funny example of this attitude and knowing what you know is when I first went to the Marsden, the medical director asked if I was going to be helping with the medical trials, because he thought that, I was a research nurse, not a nurse researcher. So I said to him, I think you're getting research nursing and nursing research confused. And he looked really confused. So then I explained the difference, but I said I would be happy to use his trials as a way of developing my research portfolio in terms of patient experience. And then he was sort of looking at me. So I said to him, okay, if you think that biomedical research is described as bench to bedside, which it always is in the UK, everybody talks about bench to bedside. I said to him, nursing and applied health research is the bedside and beyond. So I said, where you stop with your treatment, that's where we carry on, and we do that whole trajectory. And although it was banter at the beginning, he realized that people weren't aware of the difference as he wasn't. So what he made me do was, he asked me to do, was do the keynote presentation at the next general annual meeting. And it meant that I was able to tell the whole organisation and the governors what applied health research was. And that included all the patient groups as well. So it went down really well at the end. What about you, your examples of...
I think it's great what you said. And we have to remember it's our own attitude and confidence, but it's also the other parts, attitude and confidence. But I mean, I think confidence can be difficult. I believe I'm a very confident person in myself, but still through all these years, I've been working as a nurse for 35 years. I still doubt myself and thinking people would find out that I'm not on top of this. I don't know everything about this, but and I think that will always, happen. That and as you say, and I totally agree, an important thing is to be as prepared as you possibly can. I also learned another trick that made me think about that when you spoke. I had media training some years ago, and a trick that I learned there is that if you get a very difficult question on a meeting, you can always say polite, that's a very good question. But then you say what you really want to say, because to come across, it's also a good way. I'm not saying that we shouldn't answer questions, but it's to take, have a more active role as well. So otherwise, if you only say one thing during a meeting, it might be answering a questions you didn't really want to have. So that could be a trick, I think. But also,
that's a good trick.
Yeah, I think about attitude. I think it's important that we show that we care about our team's works, our colleagues' works. That's also about attitude, I think, and I think it goes a long way. To recognize that others are experts and they might be much better experts than we are, and let people raise above you. I think it's also important when it comes to attitude. And I have to say, if we should be self-critical here, women, I know it's women and men here probably in the audience, but women are not always great here. I'm thinking about, you remember the Madeleine Albright, the former US minister, she said that a quote, she said, it's a special place in hell for women not supporting each other. And I think that it's really true. And we should be better here. And if I should say something of my own experience that actually positive for a change, because I think we've been picking up our bad experience a bit here. I know when I've started the job that I'm doing now, I'm the head of department for the regional cancer center. I'm the only nurse, because there's 6 regional cancer centers, and I'm the only one that's not an oncologist. When I got that job, I was saying to one of my old friends that if I ever forget how it is to work in the front line of nursing, please shoot me, because that's really deep in my heart. And so many years later, a nurse from one of the hospitals sent me a photo, and that was actually put up on the wall as a quote. And I'm really proud of that.
Oh, wow, yeah.
If I ever forget how it is to work in frontline nurses, shoot me, and it's signed by my name. So I thought, yeah, I haven't forgot. So,
No.
and if I do, still shoot me. So that's, yeah, attitude and confidence is important, but we probably should move over to the third part of our top tips, which is teamwork. And I can see that teamwork is very related to both communication and confidence and attitude as well. So these tips really go into each other. But I think that teamwork is really important, of course, and it's related to communication. And I also think that cancer care teamwork, it's really complex and very much different to many other teams, because it's easy to forget that what we are facing on a daily basis, and that really is important to how we manage in our teamwork. So I think that's really important to remember that what we're facing and how we have to deal with that. And something we can do as leader is to learn and to introduce effective communication models. I'm thinking about, SBAR briefings, debriefings, different models that might help us, because we don't always get so emotional when we use models of communication. And that tend to foster teamwork, I think, in a better way. So, and in teamwork, to go out your way to support your colleagues, I think is really important. Pay close attention to climate and culture in a team, because if you don't manage those parts, you will not have successful teamwork. And finally, I think we have to also remember that teams should be heterogenic. We should not try to create teams with people that are completely similar, because we need, like you said in the beginning about the different perspectives, we need different perspectives within a team as well to be successful. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, I agree. It's certainly crucial. Teamwork is crucial to cancer care, and the nature of the team will also determine how successful the team is in terms of what they can do and what they can cope with. And I'm with you, Lena, is that I put a lot of focus on building the team and ensuring that people contribute equally, but also it's about their strengths. And that everybody knows particular strengths of each other, and that they're acknowledged, so that everybody gets a good, a part that is particularly theirs within the team. And I always think, no individual is good at everything. So it's important that people think about what their strengths are and what they enjoy doing, so that, they can contribute, but also what their limitations are and the things that they don't like. But saying that, I mean, obviously everybody in the team has to do things that nobody likes, but it's good, I think, that if you can do that balance where everybody's playing to their strengths, then it makes everybody feel good with the work within the team. I think the other thing that's important is that within the team you care for each other, and that when one person needs extra support, then it's good that everybody really, buffers that person and helps. And that it's the other thing I think that's important within a team is that resources are used fairly within the team. But I suppose we've just all come out of, well, we're still going back into it now, but around the COVID-19 pandemic time, we, that really did get all of our teams really closely knitted together, where we were all working for a common goal. And it was great, really. Although obviously it was very trying. And I suppose the other thing that I was advised to do by a mentor of mine was to work with people that you respect and can learn from. So look at your team and say, okay, I respect these people in my team, and who can I learn what sort of particular tips from? Because I think, there's one thing about being a leader, is that you also need to learn from others, and certainly learn from the people that you work with. So our next one is networking, and that's for me to start. And as I started the last one, I'm not really great at networking for networking's sake. You know, I've always admired colleagues where people say they can work a room, you know, so you see them flitting from one important person to the other. And I'm afraid I'm really gauche in those situations. It really doesn't play to my strengths at all. But I am passionate about cancer nursing and academic careers for nursing. And I think because of this, I've always volunteered to help. And especially if I think it's going to further either patient experience or cancer nursing careers. And I think because of this, I've found that actually I'm included in a number of sort of influential networks. And so in 2009, I was asked to be part of a national group that were of cancer nurse experts who were tasked with developing policy, resources and pathways for people living with and beyond cancer. And it was sort of joint funded by the National Cancer Task Force and Macmillan. And obviously my research is also very much focused on patient experience and practice. And one of my projects, which was EONS funded, looked at exploring the work of chemotherapy nurses. And what happened with those two sort of groups, in a way, from that project, we developed national guidelines for chemotherapy nurse education and for chemotherapy administration. And because of our contacts, it meant that we were able to present it at the national lead nurse meetings, and it was incorporated into sort of into usual care, and is still usual care today. So although I'm not, you know, I don't see myself as a great networker, I'm actually in quite a lot of networking groups, both nationally and internationally, I suppose.
Sounds to me that you are quite good at networking. But I mean, I think it's important. It's really important. Yeah. And I mean, EONS is a great platform, I think, for networking.
Yeah, definitely.
And the Young Cancer Nursing Network is just amazing. And so look at what you've done and creating these events and so much more. And I just have to say that so many times through the years, I've had, you know, gain benefits from my broad cancer nursing networks. And one example is the work that we recently done in EONS is the Cancer Nursing Index in Europe, where we collected data from 38 different countries. Would never have happened if not all of us had so many good contacts in all these countries, and so it made it easy. So I think that's really important to share experiences, good and bad, actually what we're doing now.
Yeah, exactly. And I think oh, sorry, I interrupted you, Lena. I was just going to say, yeah, I think that's a really good point actually about EONS, because most of the opportunities that I've had have either come from EONS directly or from people I've met through EONS.
Yeah.
And as you say, the Young Cancer Network that the young cancer nurses have developed has just been, it's really phenomenal, and it's really something to get involved in and to meet good new friends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think also when you network that we should try not to be so protective. So because I get a lot of questions about copyright or stealing ideas, and with different projects that I'm involved with. And I try to think that we should be generous and share good ideas, because we will benefit from that. The only thing I would say is that you have to be smart, because once it happened to me that I came to a conference and somebody had actually stolen my PowerPoint presentation, and giving the whole presentation slide by slide, just changed my name to her own. And that was not so fun to come up on stage afterwards and try to do something about that. So we should be careful as well, but mostly generous, I think.
Yeah.
So moving on, time's flying here, but moving on,
yeah.
Fifth tips is about critical thinking and creative problem solving. And here I think it's important to reflect both on our team's work and also our own leadership. And you can look for role models, and what are the role models do? What is it that they do that you really think it's useful? And what is it that people you don't respect do that you don't respect? I think you can learn a lot from that. But to develop yourself in critical thinking, one tip that I had is a method that I used a lot. Is called critical friend. Is if you find somebody that you work well with and you trust, ask this person to give yourself feedback and critique, both positive and negative. If you have an important meeting or a presentation or something that you need to lead a meeting or something that you think is important, they can give you in a safe environment, tough love, and that was good, or you wasn't as clear as you probably think there, etc. And you can do the same for the other person. That is, I think, is really useful to get, and it's so much easier to take critique from somebody you respect. So that's important.
Yeah.
And the second point I want to raise is about psychological safety. That's a concept that goes way beyond this session, but I think it's something to learn more about. It's about making everybody feel safe and to speak up. And it's not just a new buzzword, it's actually lots of research backing up this concept, and the teams that have a lot of psychological safety also create good results. And it's about critical thinking and thinking outside the box.
Yeah, definitely. And certainly I think that's one of my tips is to try and think laterally. So yes, think in the moment and think that logically, but also think laterally. So one example is when I wanted to be a clinical academic, there wasn't any career pathway for clinical academics. And so I've always, throughout my whole career, I've always had at least a morning in practice, but I really wanted to have that as a proper part of my job, or certainly as half of my job. And initially I went and talked to the professor that was in my department, and also to a lead nurse at Guy's and St Thomas's. And what happened was that they they actually did it. They developed a joint role where I was 2 days in practice and 3 days in the university. And although it meant that I had 2 contracts, so it wasn't that easy, and I had 2 bosses, it also meant that I was able to do what I wanted to do, but still, and still be able to sort of carry on in exactly what I wanted to do. It just looked slightly different. So I think it is, it's really good to try and look laterally and think about what you want to do and what are the different ways in which it can happen. I suppose the other thing that I think is important in terms of critical thinking and problem solving is that when you're thinking laterally, look for solution in other areas. So, I've always been interested in art and in expression and in different cultural perspectives and how that impacts on health and well-being. And I think that's something I think that's really important for us to look at and to learn from, because there are so many things that we can learn from in other cultures and in other dimensions. So our next one, I'm conscious of the time, but we've gone past halfway through. The next one is professionalism. So I think it's important that we maintain a professional stance, but also that we forge forward nursing knowledge and practice. I'm really passionate about nursing knowledge and what is nursing knowledge, and indeed that all research should influence practice, and research shouldn't really be sitting on a shelf somewhere that nobody reads. So examples of this can be in the RECAN study and of course in the nursing index that I'm sure that you're going to speak about, Lena, because they're amazing projects, but also it's about in terms of, sort of education and research. And if you look at the EONS education group, they've forged forward so many different initiatives to enhance cancer nursing and certainly cancer nursing knowledge. And that's something that I feel really passionate about, is that we should share our knowledge. So knowledge from my PhD informed nursing curricula, and then my research sort of changed practice. So I do think that whatever you do, make sure that you're making a difference in however small or larger way that you can. But also, as you said earlier, Lena, it's about finding a mentor, someone that you can confide in and seek advice from. And I think, you know, it is important that when we work within multi-professional groups, that we contribute and that we know what our knowledge and skills are. So that's my sort of tips. What about yours for professionalism?
Yeah, I think professionalism was also very important, and sometimes I'm being a bit self-critical here, because we are among friends, and I think we have to be. And sometimes I think we can do better as nurses. I think we tend to neglect our own work sometimes. I'm sure I'm not the only one that heard that I'm only a nurse. And expressions like that. I think we can be our own enemies sometimes. And we should try not to be the victim so much, because it doesn't really help us. I often remind nursing leaders here who use statements that might be fully true. I'm not saying anything against it, but in communication saying, well, you know, I also have a family, you know, and my salary is so low, and nobody asked me, and the doctors didn't invite me, and all these things that we know is true, but still to use that, we get stuck instead of assuming with the other part that we are a profession and we should be accounted for. So instead of saying we have this problem, we need we have the same responsibility to solve it, how can we do it? So I think we need to get away a little bit from that for victimize ourselves, and that takes a bit of practice. I think we need to practice on our so-called lift pitch. What does nurses do? What do they contribute? Because that's really difficult. And you mentioned it before, Teresa, that we say that we're caring for people, and other people say that about us as well. But we really need to practice on what is it that we really do. And sometimes nurses avoid to talk about cure and curing cancer, etc. And why do we do that? Instead, we use terms like we're looking after and we're caring for it. We do that as well, but we also cure cancer. And people understand that kind of language. So I think that we need to improve ourselves there when it comes to, because only we can change this professionalism. Another thing that might irritate some people, but I say it anyway, is it's how what I call little girl symbols that you very often see on hospitals in particular, you know, with the pink pigtails, and you have little girl symbols on adult nurses, because we want to be friendly and look nice, etc. But that actually doesn't really help us to be seen as professionals. So I think people can wear what they want, but you be aware of what signals you're sending out if you want to be professional, I think.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
And then moving over to another important area is empathy. And of course, we need to show empathy both to our patients and their families, and also to staff, and show that we care, that we mentioned before. And it doesn't have to be so difficult, I think. To be empathic, we have it with us as nurses, and we have to use that empathy also in our leadership. One way of being empathic, I think, is to show commitment at work and also outside of work. And again, remember the complexity and the demanding working situations that we have and our colleagues have. And sometimes you take it for granted that we do this every day, so we don't see it. And that's why we may miss to be empathic, because it's just there every day. So I think it's really important for leaders in cancer care to show empathy.
Yeah. Well, of course, empathy was the subject of my PhD. I spent 6 years studying empathy because I did it part-time. But yeah, so So I mean, that PhD observation work, it was an ethnography, and it was just phenomenal. The expressions of empathy that I saw in oncology nursing, well, an oncology practice, not just nurses. And from that, I developed this new model of empathy, which of course I used for nurse education, and I also used it as communication. But I think one of the things that that has come out of that is that it was almost like you could see that nurses were using empathy not just as an incident, but also as a way of knowing and as a way of processing, and a way of processing the way they nursed, if you like. They would use what they knew of the patients to organize their care. And I suppose the sort of most famous thing about that is the film that Brené Brown made of it, which has had some crazy millions of hits. But I think for me, as well as being empathic and fostering an empathic milieu, it's important as a leader to monitor staff in terms of their stress and compassion, and in terms of compassion fatigue, I suppose, because if you set a good example that you're caring for people and caring for them, then it enables them to care for themselves as well as care for people. And I think it's good to set a good example. Make sure that you have a good mix of fun and activities which sustain you, and foster a culture of caring with each other as well as with patients and families. But I think it is about being open to others and being ready to unlearn and open to new ideas, so that you're sort of ready to cross lines and ready to take different perspectives. Which takes me on to conflict resolution. And conflicts will occur. You know, we're going to have conflicts. Nothing's going to all be lovely and smooth and daisy in the garden. And it's important, I think, to address them early. It's important to address any conflicts early and not let them fester on either side, either yours or the other person. And for me, I do use empathy to understand the person's perspective. And once I understand that, you need to show that you're keen to find a solution and help the person see the bigger picture of how and why it needs to be that way. But also, I think, open to seeing how things could or may be different. But I think what's important is that you don't get caught up in anger or projection. And that, of course, depends on who's got the power within, or who assumes the power within the conflict. And this can be hard, especially if the person is angry. But it is important to focus on solutions and how you can resolve it together so that you get a mutual midway. One particular time I was thinking of, I'm just going to quickly do this because time is ticking by. So one particular time was when I was elected to be the head of my university department. Where I worked, you were elected to that position. It wasn't assigned to you any other way. And it meant I had to manage 30 academics. And one particular person that was sort of known to being tricky and dramatic, she wanted, now that she had a child, she wanted to be paid full time and only come into work 2 days a week. And it was at a time where we didn't have, you know, people weren't really working at home at all. And I thought, oh my word, how am I going to sort this one out? So I asked her who else she knew in the department that had children, and there were a lot of us. And of course, I said, well, it might be worth going and talking to them and getting some ideas from them. And I just sort of showed her the sort of bigger picture and said, you know, it wouldn't really be fair to everybody if I did that for her and then other people weren't doing it. So her first thing was to say, oh, well, everybody could do it. Then I sort of said, how would the work get done? And yeah. And in the end, you know, she did come round, but it took such a lot of patience and sitting on my hands almost, because I wanted to sort of scream and just say, you know, are you ridiculous? But it is important, I think, to listen to the perspective and just think, yeah, I can see it was because she was frightened and she, you know, she couldn't really work out and think about leaving her child. But I said, we've all been there.
Yeah, I just want to agree with everything you said. It's about showing curiosity and ask for solutions, rather than provide criticism as a leader when it's a conflict. That's the worst thing you can do. So I really think it's important. How can we address this together? What can we do about it? So you also take on responsibility yourself. And one practical thing I would add is what we call a 3-part dialogue. If you have 2 people in a conflict, try to make them sit in the same room, and you make one being quiet and you're listening to one, and you even have to time it, because it has to be fair when it's a conflict, and then listen to the other, and you sum up with your own view. And I've seen that really helps difficult situations. So that it doesn't always work, but quite often it does. So, and listening is a part. Listening to the other part in a conflict can really help. So but with that, I would like to move on to adaptability. And I think we've seen a lot of adaptability in the pandemic really recently, and for good and bad. Sometimes I think we adapted too much even. Again, I see that we need a bit adaptability to meet the needs of our patients and the family and our team, but we have to be a bit cautious here, because we can go too far. And if we go too far, we can ignore guidelines or work pathways, or consequently jeopardize both patient and occupational safety. And I think we've seen some example of that. And one example of adaptability that can go too far, we also see in the Cancer Nursing Index. For instance, countries with less practicing nurses also tend to say that we don't delay cancer treatments, we don't close hospital beds. So they adapt, they work even harder. In other countries where we have a higher number of nurses, and probably the nurses have more status, we close hospital beds and we delay the treatments. Not good for patients, I'm not saying that, but what's best in the long run, and what will happen when the nurses are too exhausted. So it's really different perspective, and you can really adapt yourself too much, and it can have negative consequences on both your own health and your well-being and your colleagues. So I think that's important.
Yeah, I certainly think, as you say, it's important to be adaptable, but it's also important to maintain your own sort of equilibrium, if you like. And I think that's the other thing. As nurses, we're privileged to access so many different types of people who live in different ways. And it's important for us to be non-judgmental and try to adapt to our surroundings and to theirs. I was thinking, when I was working in Africa, in the Cancer Institute, there wasn't enough sinks or even water when there was sinks. And luckily, I just brought a load of hand gel with me. And the first day I was running all over the place trying to find a sink with water. And then I remembered that I had my hand gel in my bag. So it was really good, because it was a way in which I was able to show the nurses as well that they could use hand gel between the patients, and that it would help, you know, it would help with the keeping the infection down and everything else. So I think it's important to find solutions that they could work with as well as I could work with. And that brings us on to number 10, which is initiative and strong work ethic. And it's for me to start. So this is one of the things that I do know very well, and it's something that I you know, I do have a really strong work ethic. I've been working all day, and I'm meant to be retired. And I'll be working all day tomorrow. But also within a strong work ethic is also a strong play ethic. So it is about making time for myself, as well as you know, being strong and working hard. But I suppose for me, my sort of work ethic is that I want to be the best that I can be in what I'm doing, not comparing myself to anybody else, and not trying to be the best at everything. It's just the best that I can be for me. And I think that really does help me, because over the years I just think, yeah, well, you know what, that's not really something that's for me, so this is my level, and I stop there. But I think it, you know, it is important to have a balance. What about you, Dina?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's important how you portray yourself, of course. I'm thinking about social media sometimes.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
But that doesn't mean that you lose your personality. You still have to keep your personality, but you don't have to be public with everything. And it doesn't mean either that to have a strong work ethic doesn't mean that you never have a good time. You really need to have a good time as well. It's finding this difficult balance that we really need to work harder to get. So yeah, I think most nurses have really strong work ethics. So I don't think we need to teach each other so much about that. It's more about finding the balance so we don't lose ourselves. Yeah, I think I stopped there.
Yeah, so we've got some time for some questions. Yeah. So I think it's back over to Amanda and Michaela.
Yeah, I see some questions. One is from Louis Cave, and it's, how do you handle other professionals who just don't want to listen to nursing?
Okay, I can start. Well, I don't have the magic bullet for them to sort that problem out, but I think it's not to go into, when we talk about other professions, we often talk about physicians, medical doctors, and I think it's to avoid to get into the classic doctor-nurse game where we battle. Try not to do that. Step up instead of say, how can we sort this out together? Try to be the better person. It doesn't always work and you go crazy sometimes, but I think still, instead of, you know, throwing sand at each other, is just, you know, step up. And I think that's a way forward. I don't know what your experience is, Teresa.
So what I would do is try and unpick it. I try and unpick what it is that is being the block in your communication together, and in a way, without knowing more about the particular situation, it's quite difficult to sort of give you general advice, but that's what I would do. I would think, okay, so, you know, as I was talking before, I think, okay, so what is his perspective? Is it that he's nervous about something? He's nervous about something I've done to one of his patients, or is it that he doesn't know what I know? Or so that would be one thing I'd think of. But also I'd think, so is it that he doesn't know about nursing, or is it that he doesn't, you know, he doesn't have confidence? So I'd try and understand what it is about him that makes him not listen, and so in that way it means that you can try and address that. So, you know, you could, but as Lena says, it is about talking together to finding out what it is and what is the block in the communication.
Yes.
All I can think. I'm an experienced nurse academic. Oh,
busy chat, I can see.
Yeah, I was just thinking.
There is just one question. Being a young cancer nurse, I feel often people can try to put you down as a leader as they give you a lot of parental treatment. What is the best way to combat this?
Oh, I think it's the same thing. I don't know what you think, Teresa. It is difficult, and it's not only, I would say, it's not only your responsibility. We need to help, all of us need to help when we see this happens to others, because that might be easier to help other people when they're being badly treated. It's not so easy to manage on your own. Of course, you can go to the next level of management, but it doesn't really have to help. So, and also go to your colleagues for support there. I think colleagues can be really supportive here, but this is an issue. I'm often raising the issue that nurses eat our own, because we're not being very nice to our young colleagues, and it's a terrible shame, and we need to really pick up our game here. So I don't know if I answered that question, but maybe you can add something, Teresa.
But I think you're right though, Lena. And I think sometimes when people are like that and they're being difficult and unreasonable, it usually says much more about them than it does about you. And it is about being able to try and cope with that in a way, if you like. And as Lena says, if that is the case, look to see if there's any things that you can do to address that problem. So, or if it is somebody that is just being out and out, you know, sort of difficult without any reason, then it is about you getting support somewhere else. And you know, almost doing a sideline. One of my colleagues at work, this was happening to, and initially we, you know, we talked about doing different things to make it better. So, you know, taking up some of the roles that she had to do that she didn't like, in order to sort of, you know, make her a bit more friendly, and then you know, helping the leader out, if you like, the older cancer nurse out. But then in the end, we actually took it to management, and you know, and we sorted it out that way, because we shouldn't have to work in environments that are really unhelpful. And we have this thing in the UK called freedom to speak up.
Yeah.
And I'm a freedom to speak up champion. So so what you do is, it means that anybody can come and tell you something. And then, as we were talking about in conflict resolution, if it comes to a point where you can't sort it out yourselves, then we get mediators in. And I do think that is really important to do. And people shouldn't be allowed to get away with treating other people unkindly.
No.
So I suppose I'm conscious we've actually gone over time, but I think we have one really important question that I'd like to ask before we finish. One of our attendees has asked if you have any tips on how we can motivate staff through another difficult period during the winter following an extremely challenging spring and summer. We've relied heavily on the cooperation of staff through a lot of change, and I know Lena and Teresa have already talked about this a little bit, but staff are becoming overwhelmed and they're very visibly struggling, and it's very hard to maintain the positive atmosphere, which is so vital. So could you offer any advice for last thoughts?
Yeah, so I'll start if you like, Lena. So I think the first thing is getting the team together and letting them talk about how they feel, because, you know, there's one thing about all of this, is that it has affected all of us. So it's important to have time where they can speak about how they feel and have it out in the open. And it's not to say that you're going to put a sticking plaster on all about how they feel, but it's really important for them to be able to say how they feel and say what, you know, what their experience has been. But then after that, it's also important to say, okay, so how can we make this better, and make it a group thing in a way, and take away some practical things you can do. But also a lot of it is about being heard, being listened to, and being understood, and that people know that everybody is doing their best. So you as the leader acknowledge that everybody's gone far above and beyond what their normal workload is and has been, but they hear the thank yous, and that they hear the recognition, and if there's anything practical that you can do, you certainly should try and do that. What about you, Lena?
Yeah, I totally agree with you that it's about listening and make people share their experience, good and bad, and for the team to sort of join about this difficult task that for leaders to express that we've never been in a situations like this. This is extreme, and we do an incredible work together. So, and make sure also that you lift this and share the stories of nurses to others, to management, to leadership, to patient organization, to politicians, to because I think these stories that nurses are telling me, frontline nurses, they speak volumes. It's just incredible. And I think we need to continue to share these stories to make it worthwhile, and also to give to be nice, as nice and friendly and caring to our colleagues as we can. Give people 5 minutes to take a little walk outside, to ring home or to do something else, and take over when you can. And we as leaders should do that as well. We should jump in the front line and help out as much as we can, and realize that that's where the magic happens, not at the office, it's at the front line. So, and speak about these things. I mean, we can't take away the pandemic, but we can really look after each other and make sure we talk about these difficult things.
Yeah, and I suppose just sort of quickly at the end of that is also look at what the organisation is doing, because certainly our organisation is doing loads of things about mental health and for the whole trust, and doing keeping fit, and you know, so all of those outside activities, if you like, or outside sort of resources, to use those too.
Absolutely.
Okay, so thank you for the great session, both of you. It was incredible. I think all our attendees are very amazed from you. So thank you, and have a nice evening. And see you soon.
And thank you
Yes.
for inviting us. It was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was great. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Bye. Good night.